this is sometimes called a preemptive war doctrine. That's just propaganda. It's not a preemptive war doctrine. Preemptive war means something. A preemptive war, under charitable interpretations, falls within the existing framework of international law. Okay? So those of you whose memories are long enough may remember that the present incumbents in Washington, one of the ways they kept the country terrified through the 1980s, as they did, one of them was to conjure up an air base in Grenada, which the Russians were going to use to bomb us. Fortunately, our brave cowboy leader saved us in time. Sent 6,000 special forces who managed to overcome the resistance of a couple of dozen Cuban paramilitary workers with pistols, and actually got 8,000 medals of honor for it. And we were standing tall after that, if you remember, so we were saved. But for a while it looked like the Russians were going to bomb us from Grenada, assuming they could find it on a map somewhere. Well, suppose they found it. Sometimes it's called preventive war, but that's not right either. It's not preventing anything. The only thing it's preventing is any potential challenge that the U.S. government invents, claims to be a challenge. That's just an open license to go to war with anybody and destroy anybody, which we can do because we have overwhelming power. And that's the way it's understood. That's one thing that happened in September. Another thing that happened in September is that it was the opening of the midterm election campaign. September was the opening of the campaign for the congressional elections. Well, the Republicans understood very well that they can't possibly win the elections if the issues are those that concern people, socioeconomic issues, basically. And the reason is they're cutting everybody's throat. And they'll get smashed if that's the issue. So they had to do what they did right through the 1980s. Through the 1980s, their policies were extremely unpopular. They were able to stay in for good reason. They were able to stay in office by frightening people, and that's what they did again. Karl Rove just was kind enough yesterday in the New York Times to explain it, although it was obvious before. It was necessary to frighten people into believing that there's a threat to their security. In that case, they'll rally around the strong leader, the brave cowboy, another one, and they'll suppress their concerns over things like, where's my job, or what's happening to my pension, or how am I going to take care of my elderly mother, and so on and so forth. If they're voting on those issues, the administration doesn't have a chance. And as Rove just pointed out yesterday, if they want to pursue their domestic agenda, a very harsh agenda, which would return the country back to 100 years ago, if they want to do that, they're going to have to frighten people. And that's correct. And they did. Starting in September, there was a drumbeat of propaganda about several things. First, that Saddam Hussein is an imminent threat to our survival, just like Grenada in 1983. An imminent threat to our survival. Another was the constant insinuation that he carried out or organized the September 11th attacks, and that they were planning new ones. Well, this was a spectacularly successful government media propaganda campaign. You can see it by looking at the polls. By the end of September and since, around 60% of the population believes that Saddam Hussein is an imminent threat to U.S. security and survival. By now, over a majority think that Iraq was behind September 11th and is planning new things, that Iraqis were on the plains. If you go back before that, it was like 3%, and the whole idea is totally outlandish. And furthermore, these attitudes, these beliefs, are very highly correlated with support for war. And it's understandable. I mean, if I believed those things, I'd be in favor of the war too. If you think that Saddam Hussein is an imminent threat to your existence, that he carried out the September 11th attacks, he's powerful enough to carry out new ones, yeah, there's an argument for war. And people in the United States are genuinely frightened. This is unique to the United States. No one else believes any of this. Even the neighboring countries that were attacked by Saddam Hussein is considered insane. But here it dominates. And this is not the first time that it did work for the election, barely. If you take a look at the election, the Republicans managed to maintain power to pursue their domestic and international agendas by a very small number of votes, a couple of tens of thousands of votes. It was essentially a statistical tie, but just enough to maintain power. And they did it exactly this way. Polls show that people maintained their preferences, but suppressed their concerns over issues that matter in your life because they suppressed it below the security threat, so you rally around the leader. This is the story that went right through the 1980s. For these guys in office, it is absolutely second nature. They did come into office, as Blaise pointed out correctly and importantly, announcing a war on terror, which of course instantly became a major terrorist war. But they also started right off with threats to our existence. So in 1981, first year, the cowboy was hiding in the White House surrounded by tanks because Libyan hitmen were wandering the streets of Washington, going to assassinate our leader. Miraculous escape from that one. Then came Grenada. There were other Libyan threats. In fact, he told us that told the country that Libya is trying to expel the United States from the world. They don't have small objectives. Then came Grenada, going to bomb us from Grenada. Saved from that one. Then came Nicaragua, which was only 2 days driving time from Harlingen, Texas. It was a cancer right in our landmass, as the moderate George Shultz, Secretary of State, put it and told Congress. We got to save ourselves. Furthermore, they're following the script from Mein Kampf, he said, planning to conquer the world. Reagan declared a national emergency in 1985 because of the threat to the security of the United States posed by the government of Nicaragua. People outside the United States were looking in amazement as all this stuff was going on. But it worked. Kept the population frightened enough to keep them in office. And it went on right through the 80s. 1988, George Bush was able to get elected by just pulling a straight race card. Willie Horton, black criminal, going to rape your sister unless I get elected. Hint it, it wasn't said in those words, but it was so close to the surface you couldn't miss it. Crime, people were terrified about crime. They were terrified about drugs. One thing after another. These are all problems, but they're no different than any other industrial country. And the United States has a level of security that's just beyond what anybody can even dream of. But the population is a very frightened population. This goes way back. It's easy to scare people. Worked in the 80s. They're doing exactly the same thing now. And it did succeed in building up enough support so that even though opposition to the war is enormous, and in fact it's never been this high, it was enough to sort of give them some kind of basis to go to war. That's an impressive achievement, and it also frightens people, very much frightens them. I mean, today in the New York Times, you can, it's a big page showing pictures of Marines and others explaining why they want to go to war with Iraq and kill Iraqis. It's because they remember 9/11. Okay, now, if somebody's watching this anywhere else in the world, they can only conclude one of two things. Either this country is so fanatically racist that if some Arab did something to you, you want to kill all Arabs. And it's a level of racism that's pretty hard to imagine. Either that, or the country is so deeply indoctrinated that people believe what is purely total nonsense.